welcome to the firm. On the show this week, the Vodafone tax case is stuck in reverse gear. First the retroactive amendments, now a government affidavit asking for a 7-judge bench relook. And the competition amendment bill gives some and takes some. We started the year with a Vodafone judgment, and the government spent all year trying to undo that Supreme Court judgment. First the review, then the retroactive amendments, and now an effort to get a larger bench to relook at the Vodafone decision. To make sense of this, I need to tell you about another case. In 2007, a Vodafone SR subsidiary, Vodafone SR Gujarat, decided to demerge 15,000 crore rupees of telecom infrastructure assets to sister concern Vodafone SR Infrastructure under sections 391 to 394 of the Companies Act. The Income Tax Department objected to the demerger scheme on grounds of tax evasion and won in the Gujarat High Court. On appeal, a division bench ruled otherwise and in doing so relied on the Supreme Court's 2012 Vodafone decision. Revenue appealed that decision in the Supreme Court and has also filed an affidavit asking for the Supreme Court's Vodafone and Azadi Bachao judgments to be overruled as they're in conflict with the McDowell judgment passed by a larger bench of 5 Supreme Court judges. Listen in to Mohan Parasran.
Vodafone gave its own interpretation. They just gave their own interpretation of McDowell, even though the argument of the government was that there was a conflict between Azadi and McDowell, even at that point. But the 3-judge bench harmonized McDowell and Azadi, saying that there was no conflict. And now the government wants Vodafone to be referred to a larger bench on this aspect. This will be a limited aspect, but Section 9 aspect is going to arise in future cases. Suppose if this issue is referred to a larger bench, that will actually strengthen the arms of the government in actually referring the main matter, seeking for reference of the main matter to a larger bench, which involves interpretation of Section 9. They passed the retrospective amendment itself only as clarificatory. Therefore, the government would want its stand to be vindicated once again, and possibly on that count, they will definitely actually insist for the matter being referred to a larger bench.
So now we may be faced with the prospect of a 7-judge bench relooking at both Vodafone and Azadi Bachao. To answer the whys, whats and now whats, I'm joined by Senior Counsel Arvind Datar and S.R. Wadhwa, former Chief Commissioner Income Tax and Advocate. Gentlemen, to both of you, a very warm welcome. Let me start first with you, Mr. Datar. You just heard Mr. Parasran lay out the grounds for that government affidavit. Do you agree with those grounds? Do you believe that they can be successful?
I personally feel that you have to look at it in 2 angles. First of all, is it proper to ask for a review? And secondly, is it necessary? Now, as far as the Vodafone judgment is concerned, the government filed a review, it got dismissed. Then all the decisions which were in favor of the SSC, all the legal principles have been overruled, as you know, retrospectively from 1961. And now the only thing that remains is the reconciliation of McDowell and Azadi. Now, on the question of propriety, it is not proper to refer these decisions to larger benches. Now you got from McDowell is 5, you go to 7, then do you go on to 9? That's a larger question. So in my opinion, it has been repeatedly pointed out by the Supreme Court that certainty and clarity is most important, and you should not keep on referring judgments to larger benches merely because there is a different point of view. Now secondly, on the necessity of it, I really feel there is no need to refer it to a larger bench, because having lost the review, this is an indirect attempt to ask the court to reopen the entire question. Frankly, if you read McDowell, the majority of McDowell says that if the tax planning is not a colorable device, not something dubious, not a subterfuge, then it is perfectly permissible. That's the view of 4 judges. And Chinnappa says a device to avoid tax should be discouraged. Now the whole controversy can be summarized in 2 sentences. If the tax planning is not a colorable device, it is permissible. If the tax planning is colorable, it is not permissible. That's the view of McDowell really. That's what Azadi also reiterates, and that's what Vodafone says. Now what the government seeks to do is they want to get back to the extreme position of a few stray sentences of Justice Chinnappa Reddy's judgment, whereby any planning whatsoever will be disallowed by the department, and that's what they were doing for so many years till Azadi came along. So in my opinion, it is wholly unnecessary, and it will set a very, very bad precedent. You had the GAR, which was so horrendous it had to be abandoned, and now if they're going to go back to this, it is going to be very, very unfortunate. And if at all the Supreme Court decides to refer to it, I think it is better that we first decide whether McDowell is right or not. I mean, I am of the view that many of the points mentioned in Chinnappa Reddy's judgment of McDowell are totally unsustainable.
You see, let us see what was the issue in McDowell. It was the case of interpreting the provisions of the excise law as to whose legal liability it is to deposit the excise duty, so that for the purpose of sales tax could the excise duty be added. Now there, in that context, Justice Chinnappa Reddy did not write a dissenting judgment, he wrote a separate judgment. Both the majority view and Mr. Chinnappa Reddy's view was that wherever there is a colorable device which has got no commercial value, that can be regarded. But otherwise, tax planning per se is perfectly legitimate.
But Mr. Wadhwa, what you're saying does not sit exactly with the stance of the government in the affidavit that they filed earlier this week, because they've gone on to quote Justice Reddy's comment from within that judgment, and that quote seems to imply that any transaction which is a device to avoid tax is not a permissible transaction.
Is that the ratio of the judgment?
That seems to be the interpretation of revenue. Do you agree with revenue's interpretation?
The ratio of the judgment is, I don't agree with the government's point of view. Moreover, Azadi Bachao was rendered several years ago, and in the interest of certainty, Supreme Court has itself said that judgments rendered several years ago should not be lightly upset.
Mr. Datar, explain this to me. Is revenue trying to overturn or hoping to overturn all of what Azadi Bachao decided on, or is it just the explanation and the portions that relate to the interpretation of the McDowell judgment?
Actually, I find the revenue stand rather baffling, and particularly in the light of Mr. Parasaran's comments. If it is their plea that the Chinnappa Reddy view in McDowell should be restored, if you take that extreme view, then you land up in a position where any kind of any contract which results in the slightest reduction of tax is a device and has to be ignored. If you come to that very absurd position, then we are in a lot of trouble. Now, if, as Mr. Wadhwa put it, and all of us agree, that nobody is canvassing for the view that a colorable device should be permitted. That's a given. Nobody is even arguing that something colorable should be permitted. Vodafone doesn't say so, Azadi doesn't say so, McDowell doesn't say so. All are commonly agreed that anything which is dubious or colorable should not be permitted.
Mr. Datar, sorry to interrupt you, but all are not commonly agreed.
Why you want to review?
Sir, sorry to interrupt you, but all are not commonly agreed, because revenue seems to believe that it's not just the aspect of colorable device, but all of the commentary of Justice Chinnappa Reddy on tax planning that the majority agreed with, and hence should stand as the combined decision of McDowell, and therefore the most important decision, because that was determined by a 5-judge bench.
Yes, but
then Chinnappa Reddy also agrees with the majority view, where this is not mentioned, where they say tax planning is legitimate. So what do you make of that? Yes. You have to read the
and one more thing, if I may just mention here.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
If I may just mention here, the majority refers to tax planning in just one paragraph. In fact, it is ironical that this judgment, which has given so much trouble to SSCs for the last 27 years, there was no issue of tax planning and tax evasion at all. It was a simple sales tax case where the entire observations of Justice Reddy were really unnecessary. But anyway, that's history now.
Okay, both of you agree.
The majority uses the word colorable device, and the minority, I mean the concurring view of Justice Chinnappa Reddy keeps on using the word device again. Now, device itself has got an odious connotation. It means something which is colorable, which means something which is dubious. So if you read it in that way, I don't see what's the objective of the revenue in referring to a larger bench. What are they going to achieve? Do they want to say that any tax planning is bad?
Mr. Datar, I want to ask you this though, but both of you have made the point that for the last several years, over 2 decades now, this issue of device, colorable device, what did the McDowell judgment really lay out, has been one that revenue is agitated upon in several different cases. Can I ask you this question this way? Is it maybe time to put this whole matter at rest, and maybe hence a 7-judge bench is probably the only way to go about it, because for once and for all we can get some sort of final determination on what is permissible, what is not permissible? Or am I being too hopeful? Could it be the case that after a 7-judge bench, if revenue is not happy with that decision, they may ask for a 9-judge bench and this matter would prolong indefinitely? Mr. Wadhwa?
Then the whole Supreme Court.
You can't rule out the possibility of a 9-judge bench coming later, but I frankly, the way it's going, I think it's worthwhile going into a 7-judge bench so that the entire thing is laid to rest at least for the timing, and it's very rare that a 7-judge bench is then reversed by a 9-judge bench. Let the Supreme Court decide once and for all what is tax planning, what's a device, what is colorable, and let them lay down tests completely so that there is complete clarity and certainty.
I would agree with Mr. Dattar. Let the issue be clarified once for all, so that the ghost of this, what is the colorable device and what is tax planning and Chinapareddy's judgment, the scope of it, all that should be laid to rest for all, once for all.
If I may just supplement Mr. Wadhwa, what I am saying is, if it is referred to a 7-judge bench, and if the 7-judge bench doesn't hear the matter quickly, then you're going to have a prolonged period of uncertainty. For example, entry tax, the 9-judge bench is now pending for more than 2 years. It's not yet taken up the hearing. So if you're going to refer it to a 7-judge bench, then, and the 7-judge bench is going to be taken up for hearing, say after 12 months or 15 months, then just look at the uncertainty.
And that's exactly connected. So that's exactly connected to my last question, sir, and which is, what is the commercial implication of all of this?
As Mr. Parasan said, they just don't want to refer this McDowell-Azadi controversy, but want to go into Section 9, clarificatory amendments, and the entire legal gamut of issues. Then we are in for a process of a very long-drawn litigation. And as I mentioned earlier, the government will get far more taxes if it accepts Vodafone gracefully and moves on, rather than keeps on churning it by retrospective amendments and these constant references. We lose far more money, far more investments, and far more the confidence will be lost among the industry if you're going to keep on making the law uncertain and unstable. So I think in the long run, commercially also, it's better if the government drops its plan to refer to a 7-judge bench, accepts Vodafone gracefully, and leaves it to the retrospective amendment. That will be far better for all of us, I think.
Mr. Dattar, that may amount to wishful thinking, because as of now, the government does seem determined. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of The Firm. With that, we need to take a quick break. On the other side, the Competition Amendment Bill gives some and takes some.